So welcome everybody to the 10:15 Trends session today on Friday. Thank you very much for spending your time with us, not only at Trends, but in this session. We were just talking before this event how the idea of industry credentials is really starting to take a foothold with our industry partners, within our college programs, within our courses, and really becoming a topic of discussion. So today's session is appropriately titled Awarding Academic Credit for Industry Credentials, co-designing michigantransfer.org. And I would like to introduce Erica Orians, Michigan Community College Association. So Erica joined MCCA in 2015 as the executive director of the Michigan Center for Student Success, where she supports community colleges in their efforts to improve student success. Erica earned her PhD in educational leadership and policy from the University of Utah, where her dissertation focused on benchmarking and efficiency among rural community colleges. She earned her MA in Higher Education and Student Affairs and BA in History from The Ohio State University. Thank you, Erica, for being part of it. And then I'm very fortunate to welcome Katie Giardello, Michigan Community College Association. Katie has been with MCCA since 2015. She is currently the manager of network engagement for the Center for Student Success, having served previously as the Michigan Transfer Pathways Project Consultant and Director of Veteran and Transfer Initiatives. Katie holds a BS in Human Ecology and an MA in Educational Policy and Leadership, both from The Ohio State University. She is currently pursuing her doctorate in Educational Leadership at Western Michigan University, where her dissertation is focused on the organizational complexities of transfer articulation. Welcome you both to this presentation, and we're looking forward to it.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason. Katie and I, folks don't read our bios very often together, but yes, we are both Buckeyes and, just survive up here in Michigan with all of you. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Erica. If I haven't met you before, I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. I hope that those of you who are here with us were able to read the description of the session because we are really structuring this as a working session. We will be asking for your feedback, as Jason described, about co-designing a new feature on the Michigan Transfer Network. As Jason said, we are your presenters today, and we work for the Michigan Center for Student Success. That is part of the Michigan Community College Association, where we work closely with Michigan's 28 community colleges, focused on improving equitable student outcomes as part of the association. The purpose of our session today is to work with you to co-design the new features on the Michigan Transfer Network, identify opportunities and challenges, and discuss the needs of community college students and employers as it relates to awarding academic credit for industry credentials. With that brief background, I am going to turn it over to my colleague Katie to provide you with a project overview.
Thank you. And our portfolio has grown over time and has included a number of academic-focused programs, from bolstering developmental education and co-requisite curriculum support models to guided pathways, to our recent My Transfer Pathways, and now our Strengthening My Workforce Pathways project, which is generously funded by the Ascendium Education Group. We received this grant earlier this year, and we have been very busy working with some college leaders and among our staff to provide a blueprint for the college, or for the new project, which will be kicking off this fall. So the big picture of this project is obviously this goal statement, which is related to strengthening equitable access to and through workforce programs. We are focusing on several discrete strategy areas, one being workforce program design, two being industry recognized credentials, which is what we're here to talk with you all about today. And then number three, providing transfer pathways to bachelor's degrees in applied workforce areas. And strategy four, which will come toward the end of the project, closer to the 2022-2023 mark, is to bolster capacity for timely advising interventions among the colleges and within your program areas. All of these strategies will work together to meet our intended goal, which is strengthening that equitable access to and through workforce programs throughout Michigan's community colleges. But the strategy, as I said earlier, that we are here to talk with you all about is working to embed industry recognized credentials into your program areas and clarifying for students and the general advising public how they might be able to receive academic credit for those embedded credentials, or what the relationship is between the credentials and your curriculum. So what does this look like? Right now, as many of your programs already do, there is a course that is part of your curriculum design process that's embedded in your credential or associate degree program that is aligned with the competencies necessary to sit for an industry credential examination. And then the hope is that the student is well prepared through your program to earn the industry credential and the credit for the college course that you have designed to create those competencies, or help the students develop those competencies. So if the arrow goes that way, we also want to focus on the arrow going the other way and doing a little bit of backward design and trying to communicate to folks who may have earned an industry credential how you all in your program areas may be able to evaluate what that credential is and where it fits into your program to award college credit. And that's really what we're talking about today is how is that working on your campuses? What are your policies and procedures to do so? And then how is it being communicated to the public, usually through some sort of web-based platform? I think we have another example. Sure. So the example here is in computer information systems, where you can see if a student, theoretically, if we're going forwards, if the arrow's going the other way, they're taking your class, and that's CIS 101, so that they can get their Cisco CCNA1 certification at the end of that. But if a student would come in who has already earned that credential, is there an opportunity then to pull them into your program with this backwards design thinking, provide them with credit, and provide true transfer credit for the curriculum that they would have already completed by virtue of showing those competencies? So we will be doing some work around our technology database in the mytransfer.org web interface. And Erica's going to talk with you a little bit about how that work interfaces with the other support our project will provide.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks, Katie. Excellent overview. I'm sure almost everybody, if not everyone in this session, it was a pretty basic overview of how we would award credit for credentials, but we just wanted to make sure that we were on the same page about what our priority is with this project. So throughout the project, we will provide 4 sort of different domains of support as it relates to this work. First, we want to help institutions develop equitable policies. We find that many institutions have a policy on the books broadly as it relates to credit for prior learning. But we want to take a critical eye to how folks are using that through their recognition of industry credentials. We want to expand credential alignment. Katie and I have done quite a bit of research on what colleges are currently doing, and there are certainly programs that award credit for credentials, or have a credential equivalencies established, but we want to help colleges think about how they can expand that to other program areas at their institution. I want to clarify on that one that we are not asking you to award credit for credentials that are not embedded within your program. So we are not in the business of promoting certain credentials that we think, well, we shouldn't think that. Our response to that is always that it should be driven by labor market demand in the region that you serve. We also want to provide support for institutions to design effective processes. So how do students know that they can earn credit for that credential? How does that work through the business process at your institution? Very similarly to the well-established process of awarding credit for transfer credit. So we'd like for this process to be as seamless for students as that process often is, or at least is communicated with students. Finally, we want to support colleges to communicate with students and employers. And the reason that this is in the different blue here is because that's what we want to talk with you about today. Colleges will communicate this information with students and employers often on your own website, but we want to talk with you today about how we can help you do that through the Michigan Transfer Network as well. For those of you who have never used it before, this is the interface for the Michigan Transfer Network, which was updated about 2.5 years ago, and we rebranded it as mytransfer.org, and sort of subtitle of Michigan Transfer Network. The new, or now new-ish, Michigan Transfer Network includes information for students about how they can transfer their courses, the Michigan Transfer Agreement, and transferring their associate degrees. But by far, the most popular page for students to visit is how they can transfer their courses. For this work, we want to leverage that the individual course equivalencies that students are looking up to communicate with students how they can earn credit for their credentials. So the way that a student would do that on the transfer network, if you've never done that before, is typically by searching for a course by perhaps the receiving institution. Let's just say Macomb Community College, for example, and they can look up the subject course number and they can click search on the sending institution, and the student will get search results that look something like this. So if I wanted to know where I could take or what transfers to Macomb Community College as Econ 1160, I can see here that I can see all of the course details at Macomb Community College, and then I can see course details at a variety of different university or community colleges and universities that teach this course as well. If we click on the details tab, we can find additional details about each one of those equivalencies, information. We have comments when the equivalency started, details at the receiving institution, and then also details at the sending institution. If we take a closer look at equivalency details, I just want to summarize here what information, because I know it can be kind of hard to see in those screenshots, what the details are for each of the receiving and the sending institution. And now I want to show you some examples of colleges that are doing this work across the state of Michigan. So first, I'll bring up this really helpful table created at Grand Rapids Community College for their associate degree in culinary arts. And they have listed their required coursework and then corresponded that with the ACF credentialing level, where students would be able to earn credit for that in their required culinary arts associate degree. GRCC also does this for a variety of other programs on their campus. So we see here that if a student is an LPN, they can get credit for several courses through the nursing department, nursing practice concepts 1, 2, health, illness, perspectives in nursing, and the application of basic nursing skills. And we see that this also have a few examples here in other areas of the college as well. I'll note here that I have included links to all of these pages at the end of the presentation as well. I want to transition to some great work at Northwestern Michigan College by our host, Jason Slade, where Northwestern also communicates to students very clearly how they can earn credit in the CIT department for several certifications in the IT area. And then finally, I will point out that Macomb Community College provides information in their transfer equivalency database. And I selected the Cisco Systems area to be able to show how the relationship between the credential at Cisco and then the credential at Macomb Community College. So that's a little background about what we are trying to do through the Michigan Transfer Network to be able to communicate more effectively with students and then potentially with employers as well. However, we know that the way that we do course equivalencies, there are some aspects of that we can transition into using similar criteria to determine if a student can get credit for an industry credential. But we also know there are differences. And what we're asking for you today in the next 30 minutes or so is about your input and advice on what we should be thinking about as we're designing the Michigan Transfer Network. Katie is going to facilitate 5 questions that we have we're going to use Mentimeter, and we'll be showing you each one of these questions. So I want to ask you to, I'm not sure if you can see me or not, but I want to ask you if you want to pick up your phone, open up your camera, and you can point it to the QR code on this website. Or I think Katie probably included a link in the chat that you can go out to be able to respond to the 5 questions that we have for you. Katie, were you able to put that in the chat?
Indeed, I was.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, I think. Here we
You
go.
did stop sharing.
I did.
Hopefully everyone had a chance to either take the picture of the QR code or navigate over to the chat. If you click on the link that I put into the box, it should pull up the Mentimeter for you in a web browser, and you should be able to provide some input on the first question, which reads, what equivalency details are necessary from the receiving institution? As Erica described, what we're looking for here is what you already know about how this is working on your campuses and what information we may need to consider as we are building a new interface. So Erica gave you a great overview of what the MTN currently looks like and how we're using it for course-to-course equivalency matching and display for the public. We are hoping to turn that database on its head and be able to do the same thing or a similar thing with a database of credentials linked to credit. So excellent. Someone has already responded to the Menti. The other thing that I wanted to point out is we will take about 2 minutes for each question to just think and write. And then we do welcome your verbal feedback as well, but I understand you have to actually request access to become a speaker in the session. So if you would like to say more about any of your comments, we will certainly welcome you to request that access. And we have quite a bit coming in. You're all seeing Erica's screen, which should show the live responses as they're coming in. And this is all good data that needs to be considered from the receiving institution. So the receiving institution will be the one awarding the credit, which in this case, our project is geared toward the community colleges awarding that credit, either for the students who are earning the competencies through your coursework and then by virtue of moving through the program, receive the credential that way, or individuals who may come into your program with these credentials already in hand. And you all have good ideas. We need to know how many credits. It would be good to know about course outcomes. I don't know if the general public needs that or if that is something that happens on the back end where you're all linking the competencies that the credential may demonstrate with the competencies that you expect to see in your coursework. Folks will need to know about the pathway topic. Yep, which program area? Are there any prerequisites? That's an interesting question when it comes to awarding credit. Accreditation. I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about prerequisites and accreditation if anyone is interested in unmuting and telling us more about what you think needs to be in that database about accreditation and prerequisites. Obviously, rudimentary details, course equivalency name, mnemonic number, credits awarded, expiration. That's a really interesting point, something that we've been thinking a lot about. Also interested in knowing about expiration policies as they exist now. So if you're in a particular program area and you want to unmute, feel free, or put in the chat maybe what your program area is and what the typical expiration policy is. I'm just curious about that. Passing score, that's right. My assumption would be if they receive a credential, they have received a passing score, but would there be a universe in which you would need to know the score separate from having the credential in hand in order to give the credit? Feel free to share any insights in the chat or unmute. Yeah, the cost, that's interesting. I wonder if you mean, is there a cost for transcribing the credit? I know that that is common when you're assessing prior learning credit, that there might be some sort of fee to apply that credit to the transcript.
Great.
These are still sliding in. I know we need to move forward.
All right. Katie, should I move on to the next question?
I think so. It looks like we don't have any requests to speak.
Okay.
So you all should be able to see right on the interface that you're using that the presenter has changed the slide. Up at the top, there should be a little button that says Go to Slide. If you click that, you should get the question that you're seeing in front of you here. If you've lost it for some reason, feel free to go back to the chat, click that link, and it should show up here because Erica has moved us to that question. This question asks, what equivalency details are necessary from the sending organization? So in our typical database, the sending institution is actually typically a community college. And so there needs to be certain detail on about your curriculum for the receiving institution to display their receiving credit. In this case, the sending organization is going to be the credential provider. So you will need to know what details, or we're asking you what details from the credentialing organization or the student's credential itself is necessary to input to get good data from you as the receiving institution. So hopefully that all makes sense. So this idea of subject and course number, I would expect that your sender would not have that detail. So the way that I'm envisioning this working is that the student is holding their credential or looking at it on the web, as it would be, because it's probably a digital credential that they're holding, and inputting information from the actual certificate or credential that they hold into the database, which will then spit out your subject and course number and credit hours. So some of this data that I'm seeing, I'm not sure is actually going to be illustrated on the credential itself. The credits, course name, all of that is going to come from the receivers. So that's the information you all will input as receivers. What do you think is necessary for the student holding the credential to input? Okay, expiration date, that's really helpful, thank you. Competencies, is that actually going to be listed on the credential? I'm curious about that, maybe in some fields it is. Grade or score, again, that's really interesting to me. It seems to me if they've passed, they have the credential, but if you have policies that would dictate otherwise, I would love to hear about that. Credential name, obviously, really helpful. Organization awarding the credential, I can see that as well. What else? These are a little slower to come in. I think we had a little bit of a hiccup in the beginning understanding what we were putting in as the sender. Again, to me, it's a student holding the certificate, putting those details in. So what details are on the certificate or credential that you all would need to be able to spit out what your course equivalency and credits are? This last one, if the training program they went through to earn the certificate may have, I see, okay, may have a standard of 70% or higher, that keeps going away. If our program standard is higher, I would want some evidence that they know enough. I see. Okay, again, really curious to know which programs might have a higher standard and what is the implication of that in your program? Do the student earn, do they earn more credit if they have a higher competency? Is there a possibility that they would earn credit for more than one course because they have higher than what's standard? Or are they not able to apply the credit if they don't have your higher standard? Those would be questions I would have. And then I'm having the certificate organization should have a competency list. Got it. Okay, that's helpful. I think the competencies being input at this stage by the sender seems unlikely, but I understand how and why you would need those competencies to be able to make the alignment between your curriculum and your own credentials. Looks like we're getting just a little more. Yep. Well, Holly, that's a good question in the chat. She says sender equals student. In my world where the sender is actually, so Erica, you'll have to weigh in if you think differently because I'm seeing you shake your head. I actually think the student is the consumer using the sending function, but the entity that is the sender is actually the credential awarder. So the organization awarding the credit. But in my world, the student would be the one sitting in front of the computer putting details from the credential in. What were you going to say, Erica?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that question. This is an often misunderstood part of credit equivalency in the transfer database. So you would think in the example I showed earlier that Macomb Community College entered information and Alpena Community College entered information about their equivalencies. But actually, only Macomb Community College, the receiving institution, is entering that information. So what we would need to know from the sending institution will be provided by the college. So it would be provided by Macomb. So as is listed on here, Macomb would tell us what is the organization awarding the credential? What is the credential name? And we'll need to think about, this is all extremely helpful because we'll need to think about when we design this on the back end of the MTN, how do we ensure that all of us are using the same credential name, for example, or the same credential organization? So this is particularly helpful as we're thinking about designing this.
Thank you. And in the chat, Holly suggests a flowchart with terminology would be helpful. Certainly, we will have lots of technical details when we are ready to request the data from your colleges. When we rolled out the mytransfer.org website, we had a number of webinars and some video and written instructions available to help colleges understand what data we needed to see in the file and then how to go ahead and use the file for uploads. Because as Erica described, you will be uploading the data, but as you think about the student as the consumer using the database, they need to be able to find themselves in your data, which means they have to know and have alignment between the name of the credential that they're using and the one that's in your database. And what would happen if they tried to put something in that you didn't have in your data file? How could they find more information, or what happens in that scenario? Mm-hmm. This is really helpful. Thank you. I think we're probably ready to move on. I haven't seen any requests for dialogue, and the chat stuff has been very helpful. So again, you should have automatically updated to the next question. If you didn't, click that go to slide button at the top of your interface, or go back in the chat to my link if you need to refresh, and you'll come to this question, which asks, what should we anticipate for complex equivalencies such as many to one, one to many, and many to many? To be honest with you, most equivalencies are complex, even if they're one-to-one. As we're already discussing in this session, there's a lot of detail that needs to be shared between sending and receiving entities in order to understand clearly what the student's credit opportunities are. In this case, it's even more complex because we're not necessarily comparing catalog to catalog. We're comparing those competencies earned and the credential with the competencies earned in your curriculum, which takes just a little bit more work to bring them together. But we do recognize also, and I heard in a call earlier this week, that sometimes a credential is only part of your curriculum outcomes for a single course. So what does it mean if the student has the credential, but that doesn't cover all of the competencies in your course? Are you able to give them partial credit? Is there a modularized version of the course they could take to complete the sequence of curriculum in order to move into or through your associate degree program, as it would be? Or is it possible that your courses actually splice the content into several courses so that if they bring the credential in, they should get 2 or 3 courses, credit for 2 or 3 courses? What is important to know in that regard? I'm seeing some courses prepare, for 2 different credentials, but they may only have 1. That's really important for us to be able to think about. Thank you. Sometimes students need to take multiple courses to earn 1 credential. That's right, too, kind of the same idea. Is anyone interested in saying more about that, or how you're currently handling that if that happens in your programs? When I was coordinating a similar initiative to award credit for veterans, there was a lot of talk about that modularization of coursework, or flexibility in independent learning environments, where if you don't have a structural systemic solution like a modularized course that could be taken to help the student fill those competency gaps if they haven't covered the breadth of the curriculum, then I heard from some individuals that they were doing individual portfolios or independent study options for students. Are there other things? Oh, good. People maybe are asking to talk. I think Pam was first, so I'll let you go, Pam. I just muted Erica so that her dog didn't steal your thunder, Pam. Did you receive the approval to speak, Pam? Okay.
Katie, it has not popped up yet. I have one from Chris.
I see one from Chris as well. Pam says it's not working for her. So Chris, I'm going to give you the plus, see if yours works. And then Pam, I don't know if we need to try again. Go ahead.
Can you hear
Chris.
me?
Yes, and I can see
Can
you.
you hear
Hello.
me?
Yeah.
Hi. We're working on this at our college right now. And part of it came about because of the ladder program in nursing that we have. And we have students that come in with an LPN, a licensed practical nurse, who want to complete our RN program. And in order to complete the RN program, they have X number of credits they have to get to that associate degree. And the problem that we're having is that what we're currently doing does not give them full credit for that. And that runs into financial aid problems. It runs into all kinds of things. So I'm hoping that what we will end up doing is awarding credit for that credential and giving them a block number of credits that would fill that part of the program.
Yeah, that sounds like a nice solution. How do students hear that message? Do you know what I'm asking? Like sometimes that's a complicated discovery to be made as a student is coming in. Have you had experience explaining that, and what information helps?
It's been horrible because, because I want to give them full credit because I know that credential, that license is, they put a lot of work into it. And for them to have to retake classes or take fluff classes just to earn enough credits is horrible. And they will go through counseling and they will learn how many credits will transfer in. And I think it's very disappointing to them. It's very disappointing to me that we can't offer more.
Sure. Thank you, Chris. And which institution are you with?
Muskegon Community College.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate the insight.
You're welcome.
It looks like we're slowing down on responses here. So why don't we go ahead and move to the next question? I think we have 2 questions left, which is good synchronization with our timing. So again, this should refresh, or you should be able to select the blue button to get to the next question, which is, what concerns should we anticipate with credential expiration? I heard some of this and alluded to it earlier. I'm very interested in knowing which industries are using expirations and what is the shelf life, if you will, for a credential. I'm a little bit green in this area, so I am very interested in hearing from you all as to which programs and what kind of expiration you're dealing with when students are coming in or when they're coming out of your programs even, if anyone's interested in sharing. And I know some industries require CEUs, so what is, I don't know if there's a relationship between the expiration and the necessity to take the continuing ed units in some of your program areas, but again, I'm curious to hear what the landscape sounds and looks like.
I would just add, Katie, in some of our research, we've seen a blanket policy that a credential must be earned within the last 3 years. And I'm wondering if I was surprised to see that applies universally across all credentials. We don't see anything similar with course to course equivalency. So I think we want to make sure, if this is industry specific, that we are able to design the database to provide that information to students that they may not be able to receive credit anymore if their credential was earned a long time ago.
Yeah, thank you. The IT, we figured IT and healthcare are probably the most common areas where there might be expiration, but again, I'm a little green in this area. So if there are other program areas that are using expirations.
Mhm.
All right. Well, maybe not as much detail here on the credit expiration, or maybe it's not an issue in some of your program areas where you're that you're thinking about, or maybe you're not sure. Erica, do you want to move to the last question, or do you want to give this a little time? Yeah, that's a good point. It may be helpful for students who are searching for credentials to know how long that credential lasts, but you're right, that is not necessarily what we're asking. However, I do see how that's helpful for the student. Okay, we have someone who might want to share something. Kim, I just approved your request.
Good morning. This is Kim from Monroe County Community College. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, thank you.
Very good. It was just too much to put in the Menti app. So at our college, we have a PN to RN program option for students. And we actually just talked about this in one of our association meetings. So I think that it's tremendously important that the credential be valid and at the time that the student applies to the program, because essentially that license is verifying that they have met certain competencies, and we can give those course equivalencies. And at our college, they bypass the first year. After that, though, if the student would happen to let the credential expire, I'm not really sure that it would have an impact on our continuation or a continuation in our program, because we only use that license to bypass that first year, and then they're in our program and they finish the second year. So we're keeping them up to date with evidence-based practice and all of those type of things as they continue through the program, and they're not and they're learning the RN rule. And so if their PN license expires after they are accepted into our option, I'm not sure that that is a huge deal at that point.
Thank you. And which were you speaking of a specific program? I may have missed it in the beginning.
Yeah, I'm from Monroe County Community College.
Which
PN
academic program? Got it.
PN
Okay.
RN. Yeah. PN
Okay.
RN.
Thank you, Kim. That's really helpful.
Sure.
Great.
Any other comments on this? This is great.
This is.
David, I'm going to go ahead and approve your request to speak.
I'm David from Lance Community College, and we have a pretty robust prior learning assessment, kind of like a stool. It's got several legs. It can be experiential learning. It can be licensure. It can be CLEP testing, Dante's, credit by exam. We offer a portfolio option where you're going to mix and match some of these pieces. And for us, for example, we just had a recent student that had taken classes in the late 90s at Grand Rapids Community College. And so while the classes weren't necessarily expired, we kind of sit down with each student and say, hey, looks like you've been on the shop, you haven't been on the shop floor in 20 plus years. Sure. We could probably give you an equivalency for this test, but it is 20 years old. And a lot of times having that conversation with the student, will be that, hey, I haven't done machining in 20 years. You can give me credit, but I'm not going to be really qualified to go out there and teach it. So we kind of use that overarching model. But the hardest part about saying it isn't always a one-to-one. Well, we could say, yes, this class technically, your APPR 234, I believe it translates to our metallurgy course. It isn't just as easy as saying this class plugs into this class. So we've kind of done it on a one-to-one basis, which we're in the process right now of hiring a college-wide prior learning assessment coordinator to help manage through this. But it's some of the challenges we have. Now there's some simple things, some fire licensures that you can get that are pretty one-to-one, some aviation licensures that are pretty one-to-one. Some of the, like in our military to medic, your JSTs or we have some one-to-ones there. But even like with a couple welding courses, we've had students that haven't been in welding in 15 years. Well, we might be able to give you credit, but we kind of want to feel you out first. So sometimes to say, hey, what can we put down in this grid so that you can go out there and as a student and say, I get A, B, and C, it's not always that clean of a process. And that's what sometimes what we struggle with, not only to advertise it to students, but also to try to say, hey, here's the list. And one of the things we've kind of shied away from is getting too specific with it, because if you don't see the classes you've taken or the experience you have or the licensure that you might have on our website, that we don't want you to just head for the hills, if you will. So it's kind of been a mixed bag of trying to advertise that without excluding people because they didn't see what their credentials or licensure was on our website.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's something that I'm really hearing loud and clear when we're thinking about this database. I don't want a student, if they don't see their credential in there, to think they don't get an option. They might just have to come have a meeting and do more of an individualized solution.
Yeah, and it might be something as simple as we take your work experience, a letter from your employer, your resume, your job description. We add that to a licensure that you might have or a certification you've achieved at your work. And then we do some tested experience and we bundle that kind of in a portfolio. And then, yes, we can give you credit for this class or that class or this group.
Sure. Yeah, but it's about tightening that up, communicating that with students, making sure that they can understand because it's not so clean and easy. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm glad to hear you're hiring a coordinated person because I could see how that would be really helpful. It's such a nuanced process at the individual department and program level, but if you have someone managing kind of the communications in a central role, I could see that being really supportive to the programs.
And each of our divisions has a liaison as well. So that person they won't just go to each division kind of knows their division's processes and how they go about those various legs of that prior learning assessment. So hopefully it'll be a robust way of we talked about modules earlier in another session about using those modules to give people partial credits and then filling in the rest of the learning outcomes in an open lab setting or something like that to help students move along quicker.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm glad you mentioned your medic to paramedic program for the military. I did quite a bit of work with your program there when I was doing my veterans project. And it is a really good model to consider how to do this on a bigger landscape, if you will, kind of thinking about what's already out there with military competency, which are often linked with industry competencies as well, especially in the healthcare area and sometimes in the IT areas as well. So I know some of you in the comments may have been interested in the military work, and we're happy to share more about that offline. I think we have one more question. Did you not want to do that, Erica? Did you want to just move on?
Yeah, I went ahead and left that question up there. We're interested in folks' information about if you have a website where you display your equivalencies for students. If you could please add that in there as well. But I know that we only have 3 minutes left before this session closes. So if you want to add that to the Menti, and then I'll just get us through these last closing slides here as well. Okay, so first, thank you so much. This was fantastic. You wouldn't believe how helpful this is for us to hear your different perspectives on this, because when we design this site, it gives us the information we need to figure out where we have some flexibility in the design and where we don't. So extremely helpful. I appreciate that. So let's talk about next steps. We have a really comprehensive strategy prepared to provide support for institutions through this project. So this fall, we will be kicking off more detailed information about our project vision and highlighting some of those institutions that are doing this work and where we think that we can expand some of this. We will do a workshop on institutional policies, another workshop on aligning credentials, followed by a workshop, David, that you were really talking about that business process that students experience and ensuring that we're being equitable when we're providing those equivalencies, and all students have the same option across the institution. We'll follow up in the fall with a second workshop focused on aligning credentials. And then next winter is when, throughout this whole time, Katie and I will be working with a group of stakeholders who can help us design the website. We will do website training next winter. We'll bring it all together in the spring of 2023 and plan to launch the website. and then continue to provide a communication toolkit and training resources. So it tends to be our model to do a soft launch of the website like in the spring, so that we can do that communication and hit that a little bit harder throughout the spring and the summer when we're communicating that out to students, but we all get a little practice before we do that. I provided Katie and I's contact information here as well, so please feel free to reach out to us if you need anything. I think we'll be able to provide our slides, but if not, you can find us on the MCCA website. I also linked out to some of the resources that we provided on here if you're interested in having a closer look. And to close, we just want to say thank you for your input on this. I can't emphasize again how valuable it is for just to get your attention for 30 minutes and your input on this. If you're interested in getting more involved, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we'll be able to provide you with some more information. I think Jason had to take off for another meeting, so I think we will close out and wish you the best in the rest of your sessions today. So thank you so much. Thanks, Katie.